Curbsiders Podcast is for entertainment, education, and information purposes only, and the topics discussed should not be used solely to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any diseases or conditions. Furthermore, the views and statements expressed on this podcast are solely those of the host and should not be interpreted to reflect official policy or position of any entity, aside from possibly Kashlak Moral Hospital and affiliate outreach programs, if indeed there are any. In fact, there are none. Pretty much, we aren't responsible if you screw up. You should always do your own homework and let us know when we're wrong.
All right, Paul, I'm getting the energy up. Please keep this into the final. Welcome back to the Curbsiders. Paul, we're doing Hotcakes tonight. It's been like 6 months since we did Hotcakes. I'm very excited. So coming in hot tonight. And we have some great articles to talk about. But how are you doing?
It's so nice of you to ask. I'm doing great. I've been legitimately excited for this episode because it's been so long since we've done it. And I feel like these are a little bit freer, looser. I get to learn from smart people, like a group of smart people who I also consider friends, which is just, it's nice. So good energy, Matt. I love where you're coming from, buddy.
So before we introduce our two spectacular co-hosts by way of their picks of the week, Paul, would you tell people what is it that we do on the Curbsiders?
Yep, happy to, Matt. We are the Internal Medicine Podcast. We use expert interviews to bring you clinical pearls and practice-changing knowledge most times, but this is obviously a little bit different. This time we are the ostensible experts, but as you know, Matt, we have a couple of real experts and then also us to talk about some stuff.
Yeah, well, first I want to remind the audience that this and most episodes are available for CME through VCU Health at curbsiders.vcuhealth.org. And now, before we get to the articles, let's go to the great Dr. Rahul Ganatra for his pick of the week. And Rahul, we're going to you first, just because I know you get a lot of anxiety that your pick isn't as good as other people's, even though, my opinion, they're always excellent. So great to see you, and tell the audience what's your pick of the week.
Hi, Matt. Thank you for acknowledging how difficult it is to give a pick of the week after Paul. So I just finished reading, well, I shouldn't say finished. I'm almost done reading the second book in the Expanse series. I don't know if people are familiar with this. It is also a show on Amazon Prime. Yeah, this is a series by an author, James S.A. Corey, and it is kind of an epic space opera interplanetary geopolitical, spycraft. It is a thrilling ride. The first book I thought was a little slow, but I'm almost done with the second book, and it's totally worth the ride. I hear the show is good. I've not seen it, but the books are fantastic. So I highly recommend the Expanse books by James S.A. Corey.
And I think the first book is Leviathan Wakes, right?
That's it.
And
yes.
I read it. I haven't got to the second one, but now you're kind of pulling me back towards that. So maybe I'm going to have to check it out.
Oh, you got to hang on. Yeah. I wasn't going to, but then a friend of mine said, you got to read the second one, and it really starts to pick up and get spicy.
That's so fun. I'm in the exact same boat, Matt. Like, literally, I read the first one, like, that was pretty good, but also these are family Bible sized, and I don't know if I have two more in me, but if they pick up, I will revisit.
Oh, stick with it.
All right, we're going to give even more distance from your pick of the week to Paul's. Dr. Nora Taranto, we are now kind of neighbors, and you and Paul are really neighbors. You've moved to the city of brotherly love. Welcome, and tell people how is it, and what's your pick of the week?
Thank you so much. Glad to be here. I haven't cited Paul yet, but I think he may actually be intentionally avoiding trying to see me in our neighborhood. So
he's seen you 17 times already.
Second of all, if we could not accidentally dox us on air, that would be super duper.
I said this. Philly is a huge city, Paul. That's all I said. We can bleep that if you want.
It's fine.
So in my time since moving, I have had a little bit of time to watch TV, and I actually just started Cheers, which I know is a throwback, but I realized I had heard folks talking about it for a long time, and upon moving away from Boston, I decided that I should watch a show that was set in Boston, and really good so far.
You are an old
Just
soul,
wait for
Nora.
the spin-offs, Nora. You got Frasier.
Really?
Sam
What?
Jackson.
Wait, Frasier is a spin-off of Cheers? Wow, okay.
Well, I feel like I just spoiled a major part of Cheers.
Paul, we are so old. This is just. Yep. I've never felt older on this show than right at that moment, Paul.
You're welcome.
Enjoy your youth, Nora.
Thanks.
So, Paul, pick of the week.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to recommend the movie Men, which it's a 2022 movie that came out. It's by Alex Garland, who is a director that I deeply love. He directed the movie Annihilation, which is a movie I probably recommended in the past. It's a movie I think about all the time. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. So he directed this movie called Men that just came out, and it's about this woman who is in an abusive relationship. It's exactly as grim as it sounds, by the way. And basically witnesses her partner plunged to his death outside the window and goes away to a British countryside to kind of regather herself and becomes menaced by a group of men sort of around. And it's awfully hard to explain, but the men are all played by the same actor. And it's this really like hypnotic, beautiful, fascinating interpretation and sort of meditation on the relationships between genders. But I also think, and I think I could say this without spoiling things, it's filtered through the myth of Pan. There's some stuff with echoes that are sort of weirdly important. Like, and I didn't realize this until after I came home, and it was a movie I couldn't stop thinking about. And the more I sort of researched, the more I realized that myth became applicable. And it doesn't give you any easy answers. Like, at the end, there's no sort of tidy resolution, but you just leave just stunned and sort of thinking the entire time about what they were trying to accomplish and what they were trying to say. So it's a beautiful, horrifying, deeply uncomfortable movie. So if that sounds at all appealing to you, I would recommend the movie Men, which has to come out streaming sometime soon.
Paul, that sounds a little too heavy for me. I'm not gonna lie. I still need to watch that. What's that movie? Everything all at once. Whatever that.
Everything Everywhere All at Once. Yeah. Also, terrific.
I still need to get to that one. Well, thank you for the pick of the week. If people want to, you know what, Paul, I'm gonna save my other pick of the week for another time, because I was gonna try to really annoy you with a pick of the week that wasn't really a pick of the week. But I'll say I recently watched the movie Free Guy. It's predictable, but it's a fun movie and not nearly as heavy as what Paul just recommended. So. Free Guy. Goes
down easy.
It was fun. Goes down easy. Just like I like it, Paul. Nice and stupid. Yeah. All right.
Rolls right off the brain. I could not remember a thing about it.
Okay. All right. Let's talk some medicine here. So the first article, which I will be presenting, this is exciting, Paul. This new weight loss drug, Tirzepatide, or is it a diabetes drug, Paul? I don't know. What are your thoughts? Weight loss drug or diabetes drug?
I mean, it's, peanut butter and jelly. You can't really have one without the other. So I think but it's certainly the weight loss is the thing that everyone's talking about.
Yes. So this is the SURMOUNT-1 study. It was published in the New England Journal in July. And this was asking the question, does the glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide / glucagon-like polypeptide 1, so let's just say GIP/GLP-1 agonist, Tirzepatide, lead to meaningful weight loss? And they were looking at patients who had obesity or who were overweight with comorbidities, but did not have diabetes, because we already know it does work for diabetes, and there was weight loss seen in patients with diabetes. But they're trying to get this approved as a weight loss drug as well. So this was a phase 3 multi-center, randomized, placebo-controlled trial, lots of sites, almost 120 sites in 9 countries, and included just over 2,500 patients. And they basically looked at 3 different doses of Tirzepatide. There was the 5 milligram, 10 milligram, or 15 milligram dose, and then there was or placebo. So there was 4 groups, and there was a 20-minute, Paul, this is one of those ones like with semaglutide, which we talked about in the past, where you have to ramp the patient up first. So there was about a 20-week run-in period, and then they continued the study for another 52 weeks. So it was 72 weeks total. And this was a positive trial. They were looking for % change in weight from baseline and weight reduction of 5% or more. And my goodness, Paul, they had a huge weight. What were your feelings about the numbers that you were seeing here?
No, I mean, alarming is not the right word, but I think one of my favorite things about the study is even the authors seemed shocked at the extent of weight loss that they had. Like, I think they even comment this was more than what we expected. So, like, I think it's impressive. I can't imagine why we wouldn't be excited about this medication right now. I think you'll talk about potential downsides, but
right.
Really deeply compelling. I think on par with, as we were talking about offline, with metabolic surgery to some extent. So it's impressive stuff.
So the numbers, I'll give the numbers, and then I want Rahul to talk to us a little bit about this, because it's a positive trial, so he's going to talk about potential sources of chance or bias. So they had a dose-dependent weight loss. The average weight loss in the lower dose group was somewhere around 15%. all the way up to almost 21% weight loss from baseline in the 15 milligram group of tirzepatide. And in the placebo group, there was only a 3% weight loss. So that means that the absolute difference between groups was something like 12 to 18%. And just a huge number. I mean, patients lost like 4 to 6 inches on their waist circumference, and about half the patients in the 10 milligram group and about 57% of patients in the 15 milligram group had over 20% weight reduction. So that's just insane. Rahul, tell us, what did you think about the setup of this trial?
Yeah, you chose the right statistics to report for the primary outcome, and you highlighted the absolute risk reduction, the absolute change in percent body weight from the end of the trial to baseline. And you also included the time frame. So that's enough information for us to calculate the number needed to treat over the course of the study period. And it's going to surprise nobody that with an effect size this large, the numbers needed to treat are like in the single digits. So this is a very, you do not need to treat a lot of patients to see a huge benefit with these drugs. So my bias is that I'm very excited. This is a very kind of thrilling paper to read, and I need to sort of calm down and look for sources of chance and bias that could have made a positive result more likely. So for any positive trial, I always start by thinking, okay, is the primary outcome in the paper the same thing that was decided a priori? And so to verify that, we look at the protocol on clinicaltrials.gov. You can just Google that number that's at the bottom of the abstract. Primary outcome was unchanged from the beginning, so that's good. And then other sources of chance and bias that could have made this a positive trial. You could envision selection bias if this was a very, very highly selected population of patients. Maybe this is the sort of Goldilocks group of patients who is going to respond to the study drug. We don't have a lot of ways to decide if selection bias is a concern in a study apart from looking at the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And then another sort of cheap and dirty way that I like to do this is to look at the consort diagram. And the ratio of patients who are screened ultimately to the patients who are randomized is one very rough approximate measure. I feel a lot better about a study that included, 90% of screened patients than I do about a study that included only 10% of patients. So that's not a hard and fast rule. You got to look at the reasons why patients were excluded and decide if you think that matters. Unfortunately, the consort diagram, I couldn't find this in the paper or in the supplement. So that's one piece I was not able to evaluate. But, apart from those two potential sources of bias, I'm not really seeing a lot to make me question the results of this study. And putting this in context of other GLP-1 agonists, the effect size is really large. So you have to wonder, will this effect size remain to be the case when these drugs are used in the long term? That's a question that's not answered by this study of only a year in duration. So there's still some unanswered questions that remain, but I'm having a hard time identifying any sources of chance or bias to make me question this positive result.
And when I was looking, the exclusion criteria are really pretty extensive, and there was some stuff in there that I was just like, that I was just a little surprised by. So anybody with either an active or untreated cancer, I mean, that makes sense to exclude them. But even if you had a serious cancer in the past and it was in remission, like let's say breast cancer or something, they would have excluded you from the trial. And then Paul, anybody that has used cannabis in the past 3 months or is using cannabis and unwilling to stop for the duration of the study, was excluded. And anybody with psychiatric illness, that was unstable or history of suicide attempt, they didn't have those patients in there. And I couldn't really I didn't find anything in the drug monograph that said it increases risk of mood disorder. So I'm not really sure what that was about. But it was just... I
thought it was just concerns over treatment adherence, I thought was the justification I had read, but maybe I'm making that part up.
Yeah, and they did say that the authors had some leeway to say, if they thought a patient wasn't going to be able to adhere to the study regimen, then they could exclude those patients. So, I mean, I think, Rahul, that was, to me, a potential source. This was a fairly well-selected group of patients, and making sure, that they didn't have any other major comorbidities that were uncontrolled at this time. But these patients did have obesity. They did have, or they were overweight. They had other comorbidities. So it was not so restrictive.
Yeah, no, those are important, and that's in my view exactly how we should be thinking about the inclusion and exclusion criteria, not just from a generalizability standpoint, but also with the lens of could this bias towards a positive or a negative result.
Yeah,
so I think that's great.
And this medicine, which I haven't used, but it seems like you start them out at 2.5 milligrams weekly, and then you go up by 2.5 milligrams every 4 weeks. So it takes quite a while to get to the 10 or the 15 milligram dose, which was. That speculating that's probably what they're going to recommend because there weren't many more side effects and there was a little bit extra weight loss at that dose. So I think ultimately that's what this will be. And we were talking a little bit beforehand. How is this going to happen in practice? Because with semaglutide, which we've talked about, when there is some evidence that when patients stop the study drug, they do start to gain weight again. And people are like, oh, so that's a downside. But Paul, tell me what you think about this, but I think we're moving to the point where this is just going to be like a blood pressure medicine that you take chronically. And, if you stop your blood pressure meds, we know your blood pressure goes up. And I think with the weight loss drugs, it's going to be that sort of thing. We just haven't had weight loss drugs that were safe enough to take long term. And we don't know that yet about tirzepatide or really semaglutide. Like, can we put people on these things for decades? But I think we need drugs that do that.
Yeah, and this will sound, again, please edit this to make me sound smarter than what I am, but I would be curious to know the tempo of weight loss, which I imagine will be hard to estimate. So at 72 weeks where patients are still losing weight, is there a plateau that they reached on that medication?
They do. They had a lot of the weight loss was up front, and then it does start to plateau towards the end of it. But there are some graphs in there talking about that. So
yeah, I think that they said maybe for the higher doses, they had almost reached the weight loss plateau point, and so they were interested in the 2-year follow-up as opposed to the 72-week follow-up.
Yeah, and we'll get more data from this. I think this is really exciting. We talked about this at ACP. I wasn't in the room, Paul. I was I was on a cell phone on a stick in the room, but you guys talked about this at ACP, where the lecture, the basic science lecture that there's the translational, I forget what they call it, Paul, but it's an endowed lecture, right, that they have every year. This year it was on obesity, and they were talking about sort of trying to reset that hormone set point, because when you start to lose weight, if you've ever been obese, if you've ever attained a high weight, your body sort of reaches that as a set point, and we need ways to short circuit, try to reset that set point, work against the metabolism, the physiology that's causing this recidivism when people lose weight. So I think this is really exciting that we have these newer agents that we're comfortable as internists using because we're using them for diabetes, and we can co-purpose this in a lot of cases. So I'm still cautious. I'm not ready to start putting everybody on these, but I do think they will be used, and we'll just have to really watch out for safety signals as these start to get approved. I don't think this is officially approved for weight loss yet, at least as of the day we're recording this.
Correct. And I think you bring up an important point about safety. It's worth reminding our listeners that clinical trials will generally tend to underestimate adverse events from treatments, especially if a run-in period where the treatment is given to all patients was used, because patients who don't tolerate a treatment during the run-in period tend to drop out of the study. So I don't think that all patients received the study drug in this study. I think the patients were just up titrated in the therapeutic arms. But it's something to look for in randomized controlled trials, and reasons why adverse events might be underestimated. So this is one reason why post-marketing surveillance for adverse events is really important.
Yeah, a trial that I remember that did that was sacubitril valsartan. I believe everybody was really they really made sure they were selecting a group of patients that could tolerate that. This didn't seem to be the case. I was worried for that when I was initially looking through the protocol, but that didn't seem to be the case in this study. So, well, how many hotcakes am I going to give this? It's the summer, Paul. I don't know that there's any special type of hotcakes we have in the summer, so I'm going to give this 4 out of 5. I think this was a very well done study. I do believe that this has a potential to be a real game changer for us in primary care treating obesity. So I'm excited to have this as a potential tool, and I thought it was well done.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. I think barring horrifying safety outcomes that have yet to be discerned. Like, this is going to be a landmark trial. Like, I think this is going to be a really big deal for a really long time. So it's exciting.
This episode of the Curbsiders is brought to you by MedMastery, an award-winning online learning platform endorsed by the British Medical Association. So why sign up for MedMastery? Well, they offer courses on very useful things like EKG basics all the way up to the advanced stuff, point-of-care ultrasound, fluids and electrolytes with the great Dr. Joel Toff, pulmonary function testing, and even echocardiography, so lots of core skills that you need as an internist. So check them out. MedMastery's courses are taught by amazing educators. Their courses are peer-reviewed and CME accredited, and many residency programs are using MedMastery to train their clinicians. So if you're an educator and you need a group subscription, reach out and the friendly folks at MedMastery will be happy to help and assist you. Listeners of this show can claim a discount on any of their subscriptions. Just go to www.medmastery.com/curbsiders to claim your discount. Again, that's www.medmastery.com/curbsiders to claim your discount. This episode is brought to you by Green Chef. An audience, you know that Paul and I love Green Chef because their food is delicious. Both of us enjoy being in the kitchen. As I've said, Paul has more skills than me, but I do like to be in there. I like to cook these meals. I like to make them with my kids. They got to learn how to cook too. It's a fun thing for the family, and their food is great. And now Green Chef is offering more customization than ever before with new organic and wild-caught protein options. You can swap the protein in any meal that features chicken, beef, or salmon to suit your taste, and they'll deliver their recipes tailored to you directly to your front door. You can even mix and match meals from different preferences, so maybe you want vegan one time, keto the next. Go crazy with it. Green Chef will accommodate you. So go to greenchef.com/curb135 and use the code CURB135 to get $135 off across 5 boxes, and your first box ships free. Once again, that's greenchef.com/curb135 and use the code CURB135 for $135 off across 5 boxes and your first box shipping free. Well, next up, Nora, tell us what you've got in store for the audience.
So today I'm bringing an article from a recent issue of JAMA that we actually talked about a little bit in the digest already a couple weeks ago. And this is data from the VA's PRIME study, which looked at how we can harness pharmacogenomic testing in choosing antidepressants and in potentially choosing better antidepressants for our patients. And as we all know, having started patients on antidepressants and then switching them with time as we see that they're not working for one reason or another, choosing that initial antidepressant can be really tough, and there are a lot of different options. And so this study was a randomized control trial. It looked at about 2,000 patients in the VA system in the primary care setting. And they looked at comparing pharmacogenomic testing upfront upon initiating or switching a single antidepressant treatment with just standard of care. And interestingly, everyone got their DNA swabs done, and then the testing just came back to the pharmacogenomic group about 24 weeks before the other group. And so that 24 weeks were the weeks in which there were clinical decisions made based on it or just based on standard of care. And so this trial was a pragmatic effectiveness study, which, Rahul, I'm not sure whether you can describe what exactly that means for us.
I don't know that I have anything earth-shattering to say about this beyond what you've already said, but pragmatic is typically used to mean that it's kind of embedded into the flow of patient care. So this is something that is kind of overlaid onto an existing clinical infrastructure. And it's a powerful tool for research that needs to be done quickly and was used a lot during the COVID pandemic. And I should give full disclosure, some of the patients enrolled in this study were actually enrolled at my VA. And so I know some of the investigators involved in this. And it's kind of cool to see research happening alongside clinical care like that.
Nora, I'm sure the audience has the question, pharmacogenomics. I have a vague idea of what that means. What were they looking at here? My simplified understanding is something about the CYP enzymes, but can you tell us, like, how did they think that would change things? Why did they think that was important to look at?
Yeah, so I think generally speaking, for a bunch of different drugs, both in psychiatry and kind of, you name it, clopidogrel is one classic one. We know that they're metabolized differently by different people based on the different gene alleles that they have. And so these tests look at the alleles that they have for these different enzymes that metabolize drugs. And there are a bunch of different commercially available tests that look at what we call pharmacogenomic testing, which is looking at a panel of these genes, what alleles patients have, and whether they're likely to be poor metabolizers, intermediate metabolizers, or high metabolizers, in which case they would be likely to have no response or less response or more response, kind of depending on where they fall in those buckets.
And there was some sort of guidance given to the clinicians, just sort of like training how you might use these results.
Yeah, so that's one piece of this study that is kind of interesting. I couldn't get a great sense, I'm not sure if anyone else could, about the exact guidance that was given to providers about the testing. And so they used in this study, they used one particular company's pharmacogenomic panel that looked at 12 genes. And you can actually look it up in the supplemental information in the paper. But the information and guidance about exactly what to do with that was a little bit unclear to me. It kind of gave the gene and then what it was associated with from a drug perspective, just the names of the drugs that different alleles were associated with different responses to, but kind of further steps from that weren't totally apparent to me.
I just found one line in the methods section where it said there was a substantial effort during the trial to educate clinicians and patients using educational videos, talks, written materials, and one-on-one consultation with local site investigators. So maybe there was someone on site that, at least some of the time, that understood what these were and you could bounce questions off of. I feel like I would need significant guidance to use something like this.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges with utilizing these tests in real practice that many providers, myself included, don't feel particularly comfortable with implementing them, kind of in terms of interpreting exactly what the alleles translate to, and kind of where we land from a risk of adverse event perspective and also kind of a likelihood of success from choosing drug X versus drug Y.
You can just Google the gene site report and see a sample. And they basically list all of the sort of, included antidepressants and then a sort of, green uses directed, yellow, some caution, red, a lot of interactions suspected. So I think the design is meant for people like us who don't have a lot of content expertise in how to interpret that. So that was all I was going to say. Not worth interrupting you, Paul.
No, absolutely was. But I was just going to say, I think depression is such an interesting choice to sort of plant the pharmacogenomic flag. You know what I mean? Because its manifestations are so protean, and I think it's a little bit of a frame shift in the way that we treat. I mean, you guys tell me. When I think about how to treat depression, the way I conceptualize it is that all the medications based on the START-E trial work about the same, and you choose based on sort of adverse effects and side effect profile, not how effective the medication is. And even with this study, the outcome of the medication efficacy was sort of I don't want to call it a throwaway, but it was not really the main thing that they were looking at. And in terms of the actual treatment effect on patients, did not seem all that impressive, nor have some of the previous trials that they cited, like the guided one. Like there's, I think, some change seen, but nothing that blows you away. So it's such an interesting disease to sort of study using this framework when I think how you measure it and how it looks and how patients respond to treatment is so. I think it's nuanced to interpret as opposed to say something like blood pressure, where you have these sort of hard and fast numbers that are very easy to interpret.
Nora, I think we should get your take on this. Was this a positive or negative trial? Would this be practice changing for you if you want to give it a Hotcakes rating?
Yeah, and so just to very briefly summarize the kind of results, they looked at the proportion of patients that had remission from depression symptoms over the 24 weeks of study, and they found at 12 weeks that there was a slightly higher proportion of patients in the pharmacogenomic testing group than in the standard of care group that had remission of symptoms, but that actually that difference did not persist at 24 weeks at the end of the trial. And then they also looked at the proportion of patients that had medication with a predicted drug-gene interaction. And similarly, in the pharmacogenomics group, there was a lower proportion of patients that had a likely drug-gene interaction that was predicted by the test. So kind of that part suggests to me that folks were following the instructions to some extent of the panel. In terms of whether or not this is a positive or negative trial, we were kind of talking before air about how to interpret this. I think nominally it's a positive trial. They met 2 different time points. They met their endpoints. But from a clinical relevance perspective and clinically practice-changing perspective, I don't know that this is ready for prime time right now for me.
I would agree. Rahul or Paul, any other final comments on this before we move on?
Yeah, I like that you identified the primary outcome as, even though technically, the endpoint in this trial was met, patients were more likely to be free of drug-gene interactions. I almost consider that a surrogate outcome in that we don't really know if patients who got drugs with a high likelihood of drug-gene interactions ended up having more side effects or worse control of their depression. And the only patient-centered outcome in the trial of remission at 24 weeks really did not show any difference. So I agree with your interpretation that although this was technically a positive study in the sense that the primary outcome showed a difference, the patient-centered component of that really was not persuasive to me that this is ready for widespread adoption. Well,
next up, Paul Williams, a favorite topic of his is lower extremity edema. And Paul, This was on the cutting room floor, so I'm gonna ask you to tell people, once you tell them about this study, I'm gonna ask them to tell you about the study that you had conceived and suggested to me. So tell us about this study about seasonal edema.
And I, by the way, I have no memory of this conversation. So
I have tape of it, Paul. So
don't stick in my head. No, I believe you. I have to listen. So this is from Liu et al. It's an older article. It's actually, I want to say it's 2016 in the Annals of Family Medicine, looking at the seasonality of ankle swelling. And I love it so much because it's just so smart. Like the way they did things was so clever. And I just think we have to get points for that. I think we've talked before, anecdotally, I had noticed that in the summertime when it's hotter outside, I see more patients with lower extremity edema. And maybe that's because they're a little bit vasodilated, they're a little bit leakier, and as a result, they have underlying dependent edema or any other condition that might cause edema, it just seems worse in the summer. And that's something that I've always kind of noticed. And I'm like, somebody should study that. And whenever I say that, I mean somebody who is not me. And it looks like these authors identified kind of the same trend. And so they actually did the work. And by the work, they looked at Google searches and they looked at frequency and then sort of trended it against seasons. So they looked at a Google search for, I think it was ankle swelling or foot edema or foot swelling or sort of similar phrases, and then plotted this over time on using Google Trends. So the software that kind of evaluates Google searches over a time frame. And sure enough, what they saw is that, so their null hypothesis was that it wouldn't make any kind of difference, so season wouldn't matter. So they compared what they found to basically a straight line versus this sort of sinusoidal pattern that would peak in the summertime and trough in the wintertime. And sure enough, their model of seasonality actually matched what the Google searches look like. So people are they're Google searching ankle edema that peaks in June and is probably at its lowest in December. And the other thing that they said in the article that I love that they even thought of this, heart failure admissions, by the way, the exact opposite trend. You see a much higher rate of heart failure admissions in the wintertime, and then it's decreased in the summertime. So you can't even chalk it up to that. And they also note that anecdotally, the patients where they're like, it's summertime, your legs are more swollen, don't tend to go on and actually develop like heart failure or end-stage renal disease, or, no one ever identifies, mixed edema from hypothyroidism for these patients they see in the summertime most of the time. And then just to prove their point, and this is the part that I love the most, they looked at Australia's Google Trends. And Australia's seasons are reversed then from ours. And sure enough, in December, that's when it peaks. And in June, that's when it troughs. So if you actually track it out, it's the exact opposite pattern of ours. So it proves that the seasonality and not just the timing actually matters. It is so damn smart. And yes, I recognize that they weren't actually looking at ankles or measuring things or doing chart reviews, but they were like, they used a data that already existed to kind of prove a point that they knew. And I thought it was so clever. I could not get over it. So every time I shared it with my section, they're like, that's nice, Paul. We're glad that you're happy. I shared it with Rahul. He was appropriately excited about it. I put it on Twitter. No one cared. So now I'm forcing you all to listen to it now because I just think it's such a smart study.
And Paul, also what I was hinting at before, you had suggested the follow-up study to this, which would be to look at the ordering of echocardiograms and is it seasonal as well, because patients are presenting with ankle edema. And I think it's if anyone wants to do it, Paul doesn't want to do it, so we're putting it out there. If someone wants to do the follow-up.
The study's there. Just give me an acknowledgement, please. That's all I ask. Just a thank you at the end.
Yeah.
That's all I want.
And then check out our Edema episode, which I don't remember the number, 315, 316, something like that. And it was a great one. Paul talks about Nicki Minaj. It's great. So
Yep.
I think to move on, well, Paul, how many hotcakes did you want to give this? Full stack?
Yeah, I mean, it's like a full stack, like the silver dollar pancakes. Like it's a little study, but it's super cool. So
Okay.
A modified score for them.
The Google Trends searches is also fascinating and something that I got deeply into after reading this paper.
Yeah.
Same. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, has anyone ever
played
played
it
with
the
Google
last couple
Trends?
of
Nora's
days.
barely paying attention to us right now.
It's very useful.
Yeah. If you Google Trends search for the Curbsiders, you see basically nothing until our first episode in 2016, and then an abrupt and meteoric rise, which I predict will just continue.
Fantastic.
Oh, look at that.
This episode is brought to you by Southern California Permanente Medical Group, SCPMG. They are looking for outpatient internal medicine physicians to join their clinics throughout Southern California. And who wouldn't want to live in Southern California? It has a beautiful Mediterranean climate, variety of activities and attractions. It's an amazing place to live, work, and play. They're offering a fulfilling practice where you're going to benefit by backup support, no overnight call, flexible scheduling, and work-life balance. And when you join them, you're not going to have to worry about the hassles of running a practice or an office, developing your patient base, prior auths, and insurance billing. They're going to take care of that for you. And there's potential teaching opportunities, and even a blended outpatient-inpatient role may be available. So if you want to make a difference in a community that appreciates your passion and expertise, then join SCPMG as an outpatient internal medicine physician. Learn more or apply at scpmgphysiciancareers.com or call 866-449-1684. So, Rahul,
Yes.
your turn here. So there is a antiviral medicine for COVID-19 that has been, which I can't pronounce, which you will tell us how to pronounce, which has been prescribed quite a bit lately. So the question is, does it work for standard risk patients? It was approved for high risk patients, right, for emergency use. So tell us about this.
Of course. And I will just alert everybody, the brand name of what we're talking about is Paxlovid. Everybody is familiar with that. The generic name is Nirmatrelvir ritonavir. And this is a medication that has FDA authorization for emergency use. And there is a persnickety distinction between authorization and approval that I don't think really matters to any frontline clinicians. I could be wrong, but this medicine has FDA authorization for use for outpatients who are at high risk for hospitalization and death from COVID-19. And ever since FDA granted the authorization to ritonavir-boosted Nirmatrelvir, there have been a lot of questions raised about who and who doesn't benefit from this and kind of what the true downsides are. And so thanks to a press release from Pfizer, the manufacturer of the drug, last month, we finally have a little more information to guide practice. So I'm going to take you through some of that information. So we know with a high degree of confidence from the EPIC-HR study, which was published in an April issue of the New England Journal of Medicine, that Nirmatrelvir ritonavir, or Paxlovid, is highly effective at reducing hospitalization and death among high-risk unvaccinated outpatients with COVID. And NIH, in response to that, currently recommends this as the first-line treatment in this group. That is pretty uncontroversial. But increasingly, vaccinated and boosted and generally low-risk people with COVID-19 are asking me if, when having gotten COVID unexpectedly, experiencing what's basically a mild cold, should they take Nirmatrelvir or ritonavir? I'm curious if any of you have had this experience of either patients or friends and family asking you about Paxlovid.
Dr. Williams, I know you have thoughts.
No, it's my experience is that has been the majority of patients that ask for it, and even the ones that I've seen prescribed it, are patients that have at least been vaccinated and tend to be sort of in the lower risk. And I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. But yeah, I have the same experience, Rahul.
Yeah. So people have had a lot of legitimate questions in my mind about, what is the effect of Nirmatrelvir or ritonavir on symptoms, not just morbidity and mortality. So the EPIC-SR study, which even though the manuscript is not available yet, this is what this press release describes. So the question that the EPIC-SR study was designed to assess was whether Paxlovid shortens the time to resolution of symptoms in a low-risk population. And this was basically people who had none of the high-risk conditions that would have qualified them for EPIC-HR. So those are advanced age, cardiovascular disease, obesity, immunosuppression, a variety of other things. So the people included in EPIC-SR were all low-risk outpatients with COVID-19. And this included vaccinated people. Early on, vaccinated adults were not enrolled, but as vaccination became more widely available, vaccinated adults were enrolled. And Pfizer reported that this study, enrollment has been ceased because of failure to reach its primary endpoint. And the primary outcome in this study was the time to sustained resolution of symptoms among patients in the study. So this was a negative study. Enrollment was stopped, and even though the manuscript is not yet available, we know that Nirmatrelvir, ritonavir in low-risk patients did not hasten the time to resolution of symptoms. So there were two clues early on that this would be a negative study, and I'll tell you about them just briefly because they're interesting. One was that Pfizer announced that they were increasing the sample size of enrollment in the study. And this is something you see done when investigators are worried that a trial is underpowered to detect a rare event. And that was exactly the case in this study. It turns out low-risk vaccinated people tend to do pretty well from COVID, so there were not a lot of outcome events. So the sample size was increased from 1,100 to 1,400 patients, but despite that, we still didn't see a difference in the interim analysis. So it was announced that further enrollment was going to be closed as of this month. And another clue comes from the EPIC-HR study in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is that the subset of patients who were seropositive, they had a markedly attenuated benefit from Nirmatrelvir or ritonavir in comparison with patients who had not yet mounted an antibody response. And this is probably a reflection of the fact that by the time you've mounted an immune response and produced your own antibodies, you have limited viral replication, lower viral loads. You probably stand to benefit less from an antiviral compared with people who haven't started mounting an immune response. So that's just a hypothesis. It's not definitive, but those two things led me to wonder, that EPIC-SR might be a negative study. And lo and behold, now we have this information that it was. So unfortunately, symptom relief was not reported in EPIC-HR, and we know from EPIC-SR that Nirmatrelvir or ritonavir did not alleviate symptoms in low-risk patients with COVID-19. And it's worth noting that this drug is not totally benign. Dysgeusia, or an altered sense of taste, seems to be happening fairly commonly. I'm curious, Paul, if you in your practice have had patients that have been asking about this, have been complaining about the altered taste.
Yeah, actually, probably the most bothersome adverse effect that I've heard about it. It really seems to drive the patient to experience it nuts.
Yeah, and I'll say that my practice has been to the older and sicker, or anyone who's immunosuppressed is really who I'm recommending this for patients who are younger and really don't have comorbidities or doing well. I'm less likely to prescribe it. It can be a little bit challenging to prescribe because of all the drug interactions. You have to look everything up, and sometimes you're having to alter the dose or hold doses of medications for 8 days while they're on it. So it's not the most user-friendly med, and but it's great. It's great that we have it for the patients that are highest risk and need it. But this will probably help me. I look forward to the full trial being published eventually, but this will probably help me just sort of talk some patients out of it who are lower risk and might not need the medication. That's probably the tack that I'll take.
Yeah, I think that's the right interpretation of these data. So, not to be a nihilist about the utility of this drug, it's worth remembering that Nirmatrelvir or ritonavir, absolutely a game changer among patients at high risk with COVID-19. And NIH recommends using vaccination status, advanced age, and the presence of immunocompromise as sort of the strongest risk factors for severe outcomes. So for the average vaccinated, boosted, low-risk person with COVID-19, to date, we really have no compelling evidence that Nirmatrelvir or ritonavir hastens resolution of symptoms. So I agree with your interpretation, Matt, that most young, healthy, vaccinated, boosted people are unlikely to see any benefit.
Yeah. Any more comments before we wrap it up here? I have a quick article, and this was the Hospital Medicine, the Society for Hospital Medicine put out some new Choosing Wisely recommendations. There was 11 recommendations, and the bottom line here, I will say that I felt these were just like common sense and common decency, Paul. What do you think about that? We need some of that in medicine, right?
That sounds nice, Matt.
Yeah.
sure.
So these refer.
Why does that feel like an attack? Why are you directing that at me?
No. I just thought you would enjoy. I thought you would appreciate it because you're a very common.
I do.
I know you don't like when you see things that don't make sense that are not good for patients. You don't like it. So I think you will like these recommendations. That's why I was citing.
Okay, that's a nice frame.
Yeah.
All right, I like that.
And so these are low cost and patient centered ones. The ones that I want to highlight. So. I'm not going to go through all of them for interest of time, but so we've talked about this many times on the show. Please don't just turn up the oxygen and think 100% is better. If the patients don't artificially raise the oxygen saturation to above 96% on peripheral capillary oxygen sats. We've talked about that before. It's good to say it again. In the hospital, let the patient sleep, especially if the patient is doing well. Like, just let them sleep. Don't wake them up for routine vitals. And further, don't just automatically order a CBC and a chemistry every day, especially if the patient's stable and you're not really looking for anything. I see both of these things. Patients woken up in the middle of the night for labs, and we're planning on discharging them, and we don't expect the vitals to be abnormal, and we don't expect the labs to be abnormal, nor do we want them to, because the patient's ready to go and they're not complaining of anything. And then finally, urinary catheters for convenience. Paul, let's not do that, okay?
Great. Agreed.
Yeah.
Seems bad.
Yeah, for convenience or incontinence. I know sometimes patients ask, but it's dangerous. It's not recommended, and we shouldn't be putting them in. So those are some ones that I wanted to highlight. But look at the full list. There's some other good stuff on there. Rahul, you practice primarily as a hospitalist. Are you seeing these things done routinely? I think. Can you get on board?
Oh, I see all the time. As you're talking, I'm trying to decide in my brain how I'm going to, in the most persuasive way possible, relay these recommendations to my house staff. I'm on service right now. And I think the fact that Matt Watto brought it up on the show will be compelling enough, because my efforts to cut down on daily lab orderings have not been successful.
Yeah, it's hard, and I think these are good like quips projects to enact some of these things. But I think they're things we should be thinking about, especially the letting patients sleep in the hospital. That's really been in the literature a lot lately. I haven't yet seen a great implementation of it, but I'm working in only one place, and it's easier said than done. I think we have to change expectations of multiple team members and the patients as well. So, but we should move towards trying to do some of these things because they are low cost and they would be good for patients and good for outcomes. So that's that. And I think Paul, we're ready for an outro.
All right, smoothly transitioned. This has been another episode of the Curbsiders, bringing you a little knowledge food for your brain hole.
Yummy.
A+. Get your show notes at thecurbsiders.com, and while you're there, sign up for our mailing list to get our weekly show notes in your inbox. Plus, twice each month, you'll get our Curbsiders Digest, recapping the latest practice-changing articles, guidelines, and news in internal medicine.
And we're committed to high-value, practice-changing knowledge, and we want your feedback, so please subscribe, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, or you can contact us at thecurbsiders@gmail.com. Reminder that this and most episodes are available for CME through VCU Health at curbsiders.vcuhealth.org. I wanted to thank my co-host for this episode for helping to write and produce this episode. Our show is produced and edited by the team at Podpaste. Elizabeth Proto runs our social media, and our theme music was composed by the great Dr. Stuart Brigham. So with all that, until next time, I've been Dr. Matthew Frank Watto.
I've been Dr. Nora Plout Taranto.
I've been Dr. Rahul Ganatra.
And as always, our main Dr. Paul Nelson Williams. Thank you and goodbye.